She walked into the bank with the same calm she used to fold her father's shirts 23 years ago, the morning he left and never came back. The banker's clerk looked up. He was young. He didn't know her face. "We're closing in an hour, ma'am. If you've got business." "I have business with your records." Lily Minor laid both hands flat on the counter. Her knuckles were red from the washboard. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow. "The Stagecoach run of June 14th, 1876. The clerk's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. He glanced toward the back office where the brass nameplate read Harlan Bishop, President. "Harlan ain't in yet, ma'am. He'll be in." She did not move. She had the stillness of a woman who had waited 23 years and could wait 23 more. "I'll sit." And she crossed the dusty floor and sat down on the leather bench by the window, in the very square of morning sun, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she began to wait. "Before we go further, settle in wherever you are. Whether you're at the kitchen table or out on the porch tonight, let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We love knowing who is with us." The town was called Bishop's Crossing because Harlan Bishop had decided to call it that. Somewhere around the year gold first came through on a Tuesday in June of 1876 and never came out again. Lily's father, Jacob Minor, had driven that stagecoach. He was 28. He had been sober for 9 years and savvier than most men twice his age. He had a wife, Rose, 26, and a daughter, Lily, who was 7, who liked to sit at his knee while he cleaned his revolver and tell him which button she was going to put in his hatband when she grew up. The gold on that Tuesday was $38,400 in coin and small bars. It was a subscription collected door to door across 9 churches for a new schoolhouse and an orphanage east of the river. The sheriff himself, a thin man named Peabody, had inspected the strongbox. Jacob had signed the manifest. Jacob had shaken Peabody's hand. The team of bays had been fresh. The morning had been clear. The stage never reached the town 40 miles east. They found the coach 2 weeks later, ditched in a dry wash, the strongbox busted open and empty, the bays gone, Jacob's pistol still in its holster, his hat on the seat. No Jacob, no blood in the coach. No Jacob anywhere, in any direction, alive or dead. Rose wore black for 2 years. Then she made herself a gray dress and went back to taking in washing. Lily grew up hearing 3 versions of the same sentence from every grown-up she met. The first version, "Your daddy stole from the church folks." The second, "Your daddy took the gold and lit out for California." The third, from the ones who pretended kindness, "Your daddy is in heaven, child," where folks forgive that kind of thing. Her mother died in the winter Lily turned 15. The doctor said it was the lungs. Lily knew it was the gray dress she never stopped wearing. Lily didn't leave. That was the part nobody understood. She could have gone east, west, anywhere. She had kin in Missouri. Instead, she stayed on at the wash house on the far side of Bishop's Crossing, and she scrubbed the sheets of the very men whose children would have gone to that schoolhouse, and she watched. She watched Harlan Bishop by the bank 3 years after the robbery. She watched him by the livery. She watched him by the lumber yard, the assay office, the church pew where he sat each Sunday in a new suit. She watched his name appear on the cornerstone of the new schoolhouse. The schoolhouse built without the gold, with the men of the town laying the lumber themselves, then mortgaging their farms to finish it. She watched, and she kept her father's manifest copy folded inside the lining of her pillowcase. The manifest had been given to her mother by the sheriff himself, the night Peabody had shaken Jacob's hand. Rose had kept it the way some women kept their wedding dresses, as proof that a real thing had happened, as proof that the man had stood there, with his name written beside the gold, and meant to bring it through. In the bank that morning, the clerk came back twice more. "Ma'am, he's delayed." "You sure I can't?" "Set a glass of water by the bench, please." He brought the water. He stopped being afraid of her after a while. He was maybe 19. His name was Tommy, and he had a small scar on his chin from falling off a hay wagon. And he was trying to be decent because the older clerks had told him decent was what you did for ladies. Around 11, the front door swung open and the smell of bay rum and cold cigars preceded the man like weather. Harlan Bishop was 60 now. He had not gotten smaller with age. He had gotten tighter. His suits were tailored. His shoes were polished. He walked like a man who owned every board in the building and was thinking of expanding. He saw Lily on the bench, and for a moment, the smallest flicker, something passed over his face that was not surprise, but recognition. "Miss Minor." He said it like a man who has had this word on his tongue before, in private. Come into my office, won't you? Cooler in there. I prefer the bench. Then I'll sit with you. He folded himself down at the other end. His knees didn't quite fit. What can I do for you today? I want to look at the manifest from the June 14th, 1876 Stagecoach run. There's no such file. There's a copy in the county seat. The county seat is a 3-day ride, Miss Minor, and even if you got there, you'd find the same answer. There is no record of that gold ever entering this town. The man who was supposed to bring it was a thief. He robbed the church folk. He robbed his own family. He vanished. He, Bishop smiled, became a kind of proverb around here. My father, Lily said, did not take that gold. My dear girl, every man who loved his father has thought that. My father had 9 silver dollars to his name when he kissed my mother goodbye that morning. I found the letter she kept. I have read it 100 times. He would have gone hungry before he would have touched 20 cents that didn't belong to him. Something moved in Bishop's eyes. He covered it quickly. He was a fast coverer. He had been covering things for 23 years. You've had a long sorrow, Miss Minor. I'm sorry for it. But the records are what they are. If I were you, I would. Wesley Cole is on the stage from Reno. Lily said it the way a woman says the weather. Bishop's head came up. Slowly. Excuse me. A man named Wesley Cole. He says he knew my father. He says he is carrying a leather satchel. He says he will be at the depot at 4 this afternoon, and he would like to speak to the mayor and the church deacons and any member of the Minor family. Wesley Cole. Bishop said it carefully, like a man reading the back of a card and not liking what he saw. I don't believe I've heard that name. You may have heard it in a different way. The clerk, Tommy, was pretending not to listen. He was listening with his whole body. I will wait, Mr. Bishop. He'll be here at 4. I have a prior. Then you will be late for it. She stood. She smoothed her apron. She walked out into the noon sun, and she did not look back, because she had a fair amount of washing to do before 4 o'clock, and she was going to do it. The washing was hard, that day, because Lily's hands kept forgetting where they were. She squeezed hot lye water through the sheets of Mrs. Halleck, who was Bishop's sister and a woman who had refused to speak to Lily since the year she turned 12 and asked for a job at the boarding house. She scrubbed the shirts of Deputy Garvey, who was the only law in town not under Bishop's payroll and the only man who would tip his hat to her. She hung the wash on the line, and the wind caught it and lifted it like a wedding veil, and Lily had to reach both arms up to wrestle it down, and for a moment she stood on her toes and her face was wet, and she did not know if it was the wind or herself. At 3:45, she closed the back gate of the wash house and crossed Main Street. Depots in Bishop's Crossing were not fancy. It was a roof on 4 posts and a wooden bench and a chalkboard on which a boy wrote the arrival times. Today the boy had written Reno Stage, 4 p.m., and underneath, in a different child's hand and with a different colored chalk, the boy had written welcome back from somewhere, and nobody had told him to scrub it. Lily sat on the bench. She sat on the far end, because it gave her the most sightlines. She could see the livery across the street. She could see the bank. She could see, if she leaned slightly, the window of Bishop's office. The depot clock was slow. She watched the minute hand creep from 3:48 to 4, and at 4:02 the coach came around the bend out of the west. The driver on the box was not the one she remembered. They never were. Drivers aged out. Drivers got buried. Drivers moved on to better runs. The coach itself was not the one her father had driven. It was the same color, but otherwise a stranger. It pulled up under the depot roof and dusted off. A man stepped down. He was not tall. He was not young. He was maybe 40. He had a thin face and a clean-shaven chin, and he moved like a man who knew exactly how much time he had left in the world and was not going to waste any of it. He was carrying a leather satchel. The satchel was the color of tobacco spit, and it had been stitched at the corners twice, and the stitching was darker than the leather, which told Lily the stitches were years old. He swung the strap over his shoulder and looked around. Then he looked at her. Sit still now. Don't look toward the bank just yet. That was the first thing he said. My name is Wesley Cole. I served in the 9th Cavalry with your father. I am the one who held his hand when he died. Somewhere on Main Street, a storefront door closed. Lily could hear it clearly, the way a person hears things when every other sense has shut off. When did he die? 2 winters back. A small cabin west of Carson City. There was no woman there. There was no one there but me and the smoke from the stove. He had a sickness in his chest. He had it for years. The dock in Virginia City told him it was the dust from a mine he worked for a season. He worked it because he had to eat. And the gold. Wesley Cole set the satchel down between his feet and rested one worn hand on it. Some of it is in here. Most of it is not. Your father did not take the gold, Miss Minor. He was robbed of the gold. He was shot for the gold. The man who shot him was in town when I left this morning. That man is watching through his office window right now. We can take this conversation inside, or we can take it on the open bench. What would you have done in her place if you had spent 23 years being told your father was the thief, and now a stranger had walked off a coach with a leather bag and a story? Would you have gone with him? Or would you have waited, the way she had been waiting, watching the bank window for 23 years? Lily stood up. Inside, she said. But not his inside. The church. Wesley Cole looked at her. Something in his face softened. He lifted the satchel and held it against his chest with both arms. Your father, he said, always liked the church. They crossed Main Street at 4:15. The church was a wood-frame building with a square bell tower and 12 windows. It had been built without the gold. It was the smallest building on Main Street and the oldest. The pastor, old Mr. Tully, was sweeping the steps. He saw Lily coming, and he saw the stranger with the satchel, and he set his broom against the railing and went inside and began ringing the bell. The bell rang 3 times. It was the sound for a town meeting. By the time Lily and Wesley Cole walked up the aisle of the church, there were 60 people standing in the pews. There were more coming. The door was still open. The moths were coming in from the field. Bishop was not yet there. Lily stood at the pulpit. Wesley Cole handed her the satchel. She set it on the wood and opened the buckle. Inside was a leather roll, and inside the roll were 3 small bars, each one stamped with the assay mark of the bishop's crossing assay office. The stamp had been retired in 1879. There was no new way to fake it. Her hands did not shake. She had been bending over scalding water for 23 years. Gentlemen. Her voice was the only voice in the church. This is gold. It bears the stamp of the assay office of this town. The assay office of this town ceased to operate in 1879, the year after the silver vein gave out. It was a private mark. It could only have come from this town. It was meant, 23 years ago, to build a schoolhouse and an orphanage east of the river. My father was driving it. Someone stopped him. Someone shot him. He did not die that night. He walked away. He walked all the way to Nevada. He worked a mine for $9 a week so he would not starve, and he never spent a cent of what was not his. And he died in February of last year with this leather roll under his head and a name on his lips. The name was mine. The door of the church banged open so hard it struck the wall and swung back twice. Harlan Bishop came down the center aisle. He was not alone. He had the deputy, his deputy, not Garvey, at his shoulder, and behind him a man in a gray coat with a rope in his hand. Miss Minor. Bishop's voice was very even. You have made an accusation in front of an assembled town. I would advise you to be careful what you accuse. The man standing beside you is a stranger to this town. He rode in today. The bars in his satchel are not, by any proof I have ever seen, those bars from 23 years ago. They are ordinary stamped bullion that could have come from any assay in any state. I would suggest, said Wesley Cole, that you sit down, Mr. Bishop. You have no standing in this town, Mr. Cole. I have standing in this church. I served 4 years in the 9th Cavalry. I served beside Jacob Minor at Appomattox. I will not allow his daughter to be interrupted in the middle of her own testimony by a man the rest of this room knows is a liar. Bishop laughed. It was the small, pleasant laugh of a man who is not accustomed to being challenged in public. Sit down, Mr. Cole. If you will not take my word that the bars are not what she says, take the sheriff's. The sheriff? The sheriff is dead, Mr. Bishop. The sheriff is not in this room. You bought the sheriff. You bought the judge. You bought most of this town. But you did not buy the church. The church refused your money when you offered it for the new steeple. The church refused it because the deacons remembered where the original money was supposed to come from. Wesley opened the inner pocket of his coat and took out a folded paper. The paper was yellow. The paper was old. He unfolded it carefully and laid it on the pulpit beside the bars. This is your father's last letter, Miss Minor. He wrote it the day before he died. I read it to him once because his eyes had gone bad in the last weeks. I am going to read it to this room now. I am going to read the whole thing, including the part you have not heard, and you will pardon me for the parts that are hard. He read, The room listened. At the third paragraph, the man in the gray coat took one careful step back, and then another, and was gone before the bell had finished ringing. The letter named a man. It named Harlan Bishop. It named the place where the gold had been hidden, under the floor of the livery stable Bishop had bought in 1879. In a stone-lined cavity Bishop himself had poured in 1876, the year before the stage was ever robbed. It named two accomplices, both of them dead by 1881, which made Bishop the only man left to answer for it. It named the caliber of the pistol that had shot Jacob Minor, a .44 Smith Wesson, the same caliber that had been on Harlan Bishop's hip that very morning. It named the make and model of the horse Bishop had ridden the night of the robbery, a black mare with a white sock, a horse the livery had on its books until 1878, when Bishop had paid cash to have it shot and buried on his own land. And old Mr. Grenville from the livery confounded beyond measure that the mare had simply disappeared. Bishop had not moved. He was standing in the aisle, palms down on the pew in front of him. He was not trembling. He was not going to allow himself to tremble in front of 60 people. He had been too long a man in this town to be the first to break. "This is a fabrication," he said. "This is the letter of a dead man, written on no paper I have ever seen, signed with a hand I have no way to verify. Mr. Cole has had months to forge this. He comes into my town on a Tuesday and tries to." "Tuesday," said old Mr. Tully from the back of the church, "was the day your man Jacob was supposed to arrive in town with the gold. You have bought and sold a great deal in your life, Mr. Bishop, but the Lord has held the Tuesday aside for this." Bishop looked at the pastor. The pastor looked back. The pastor had buried 4 of Bishop's enemies. He knew what the Lord held aside and what he did not. "Garvey," Bishop said, turning. "Garvey." But Garvey had stepped forward. He was not Bishop's deputy. He had been the only deputy for years, and he had kept his badge by virtue of the fact that Bishop had never bothered to replace him. Garvey was 61 years old, and he was tired, and he had been a good man in a long life. And he was standing in the aisle with his hand on his pistol, and he was looking at Bishop not the way a deputy looks at a citizen, but the way a friend looks at a man who has finally made a mistake that cannot be taken back. "I will read you your rights, Mr. Bishop, when you are ready to hear them. For now, I would like Miss Minor to finish her testimony." Bishop stared at him. Bishop did not speak for almost a minute. Then he laughed again. It was not the small laugh this time. It was a larger laugh. It was the laugh of a man who is buying himself time. "I will sit down," he said. "I will sit down because it is polite. I will not be the one to make a scene. But mark me. Every name in this room is going to be on a paper that goes to the judge in Sacramento, and every paper is going to be answered." He sat down. "If this story is moving you, you are exactly who we wrote it for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep going." The town meeting went on for another hour. There were questions. There were objections. There was a man named Sturgis who stood up and said he had been a boy of 8 the morning his father had put a $5 bill on the parlor table for the schoolhouse. And was he to understand that his father's $5 had sat under a livery floor for 23 years and bought Bishop his bank? There were apologies. Old Mrs. Halleck, who had crossed the street to avoid Lily since Lily was 12, stood and said, with her voice shaking, "I am sorry, child, for every cold shoulder. I am sorry for the gray dress your mother wore down to the seams. I will not live long enough to make it right. I am sorry." Lily took the letter from the pulpit. She did not look at Bishop again. She walked down the aisle. She walked out the church door into the late afternoon. Wesley Cole followed her. Tommy, the clerk, followed him. Garvey followed Tommy. And then, one by one, others followed. They stood in the churchyard. They stood under the bell tower. They did not know what to do with their hands. Many of them had been children of 12 and 13 the year the gold vanished, and they had grown up the way Lily had grown up, with a silence where the gold should have been. Wesley Cole took off his hat and held it against his chest. "Your father," he said, "was not a man who would have asked for this. He would have been embarrassed by the bell ringing. He would have been embarrassed by the apology. He would have said, 'Don't make too much of it.' He would have said, 'Let the man have a fair trial. Let the gold go where it was meant. Let the schoolhouse be built. Let the children come.' He would have said, 'Your father,' he would have said, 'Let us go home and sit in the kitchen for an hour before we do anything else.' 'Let's do that, then,' Lily said. 'Let's sit in the kitchen.' They went to the wash house. Wesley Cole sat on the back step. Tommy sat on the upturned bucket. Lily washed the dinner dishes from that morning because she had left them in the basin and it was on her mind. From the yard they could hear the bell ringing and not stopping. Mr. Tully had not stopped ringing it. He had been ringing it on and off all afternoon. The light went gold and then lavender and then blue. When Wesley finally spoke again, his voice was different. He was speaking to Lily like a man speaks to a person he intends to keep. I had a wife. I had a daughter. They died 9 years ago. A fever. I have been alone since. I have not held a conversation longer than 5 minutes in 9 years. I will not pretend to you that the gold was the reason I came. The gold was the reason I came back. But it is not the reason I will stay, if you will let me stay. Lily set the last bowl on the rack. She turned. She looked at him. Why would I not let you stay? Because I will be in your kitchen every morning and I will tell you about your father, and some mornings you will not want to hear it. Then you will tell me on those mornings too. He gave a small laugh. It was the first laugh he had given in years. It cracked on the way out. The bell rang on. In the days that followed, the town did something it had not done in 23 years. It asked questions out loud. Garvey sent a telegraph to Sacramento. The county attorney came east on the Friday stage. He was a thin, tired man with spectacles, and he sat in the parlor of the hotel and listened to the testimony of 14 witnesses and the letter of a dead man, and he sat for a long time without speaking. It was a Saturday morning when the dig began. Garvey took 3 men out to the livery stable. They pulled up the floorboards in the northeast corner, where the building had been refloored once and the seam did not quite sit right. Under the boards was a layer of dry sand, and under the sand was a stone-lined cavity Bishop had poured himself, and inside the cavity was the rest. It was a great deal of gold. There was 31,600 in coin, all of it with the dates of 1875 and 1876, and there was a small iron strongbox with a brass plaque that read, "This gold belongs to the schoolhouse fund," in the careful hand of Sheriff Peabody, who had inspected the strongbox the morning Jacob Minor had driven out of town. There was a pistol, a .44 Smith Wesson. The grips were carved with the initials HB. By Tuesday the warrant was signed. Bishop was taken from his house at dawn by Garvey and 2 men from the next town over who had been telegraphed in for the purpose. He was not manacled at the jail. He was allowed to call his man of business. He was given coffee. He was, in every way that decency allowed, treated as the man he had been pretending to be until the trial. He did not run. There were some in town who thought he would. He had not run when his name went on the livery cavity. He had not run when the warrant was filed. He sat at the window of his house and watched the town remove his name from the cornerstone of the schoolhouse and replace it with the names of 36 families who had given the original subscription. Lily was at the cornerstone. She had a small hammer. She struck her father's name into the new stone. Below it she struck her mother's name. Below it, in a smaller, more careful hand, she struck the words returned by the hand of Wesley Cole. When she set the hammer down, Wesley was beside her. He had a girl with him. The girl was about 8. She had a blue ribbon in her hair. She had been an orphan in the new orphanage, which had been half finished for 23 years and finished now in 11 weeks. "You said I could come home with you, sir," the girl said. "I did say that," Wesley said. "What is home, sir?" "It is the kitchen where Lily washes the dishes. It is the porch where Tommy sits on a bucket. It is the church where Mr. Tully rings the bell. It is the yard where the moths come in from the field." The girl looked at Lily. "You will be all right here, ma'am?" "Yes, child. All right, child." Lily repeated it, because her father used to say that when she was small. "All right." She took the girl's hand. She took Wesley's arm. They walked together through the town on a Saturday afternoon when every storefront on Main Street had put out its flag for the first time in memory. They walked past the livery stable where the floor had been reboarded and the seams sat true. They walked past the bank, where Tommy's chalk sign in the window said Bishop's Crossing is open to new accounts. They walked past the schoolhouse, where children had been let out early and were running in the field by the bell tower, and the bell was still ringing. It would ring all afternoon. It was a small bell in a small tower, and it did not ring any louder than the bells in towns twice the size. But on that afternoon, on the afternoon when the stone was finally finished and the gold was finally home, and a man who had been a thief for 23 years had finally sat down in his jail cell with his hat in his hand and looked at the wall, the bell rang as if it were a great bell in a great city, and it carried, and it carried. The schoolhouse was finished the following spring. The orphanage was painted that summer. Wesley Cole set up his saddle-making trade in a small shop 2 doors down from Lily's washhouse. And on Saturdays he sat on the back step of the washhouse and waited for the girl, now named Cordelia Cole, to come home from lessons and tell him what she had learned. He had walked a very long way to get to that back step. He had buried a wife and a daughter in another country. He had walked 3 days on bleeding feet from a mining camp to a stagecoach station, the year before he came east with the leather satchel. He figured he could manage one more hard conversation. He figured he could manage every hard conversation for the rest of a long life, as long as the back step was there, and the chair, and the woman inside the kitchen who had stopped believing the world was going to give her anything. Lily was 40 when Wesley asked her, on a Tuesday, on the back step, with Cordelia asleep inside and the bell from the new tower just audible across town. She said yes the way her father would have said yes, without a fuss, without a speech, with one hand on the porch rail and the other already reaching for his. They were quiet people who had been given loud lives to sort out. They'd had enough of loud. Next, we will tell the story of a sourdough prospector who came down out of the Klondike with a fortune in grain gold and a 12-year-old daughter who refused to speak a single word until the day she met a widow carpenter rebuilding a church that had been struck twice by lightning.